Brittle Truths, author T.N. Teague. Chapter 3. Caleb took a deep breath, trying to steady himself as he reached for a scone, the warmth of the pastry seeping into his fingers. Just as he was about to take a bite, the door swung open once more, revealing the tall, muscular frame of Logan himself. Caleb's breath caught in his throat as he took in the man's sight. Logan's light blonde hair was longer than he remembered, falling in tousled waves around his chiseled features. His bright green eyes, once filled with warmth and affection, now held a hint of uncertainty as they met Caleb's gaze. For a moment, the world seemed to fall away, and Caleb was transported back to that day 4 years ago, when everything had been perfect until it wasn't. He remembered the feel of Logan's lips on his skin, the way their bodies had moved together in a dance of passion and desire. But he also remembered the pain, the sickening crunch of bone as Logan's fist had connected with his face. Caleb knew he had more than deserved the punch, but the memory of the pain hadn't faded. As Logan set the tray of scones down on the table, Caleb's attention was captivated by his hands. They were the very hands that had brought him such delight and suffering in the past. He swallowed hard, trying to push down the sudden rush of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. Anger, hurt, and a twisted sense of longing all battled for dominance within him, leaving him feeling raw and exposed. As Logan looked into Caleb's eyes again, Caleb briefly saw a flicker of the old Logan, the one who had embraced him and whispered vows of forever. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a mask of polite indifference.
"Caleb," he said, his voice cool and distant. "I'm so sorry for your loss."
The words felt hollow, a mere formality in the face of the history that lay between them. Caleb nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He reached for his glass of bourbon, downing the remains in one burning gulp. The alcohol coursed through his veins, dulling the sharp edges of his pain and anger, but doing nothing to quell the tumultuous emotions that raged within him. Caleb closed his eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath as he tried to center himself. He understood that the path ahead would be challenging, with numerous instances like this, where his grief and anger could become overwhelming. But for now, he had to be strong, to put on a brave face and play the role of the dutiful son and grandson. He reached for another scone, biting into it with a sense of grim determination. Lucy gently guided Caleb to sit in the center of the sofa, sandwiched between her and Logan. His legs trembled with a mix of excitement and nerves as he realized how close he was to the man he used to love. Still loved, might always love. Goosebumps prickled across his skin as he felt the heat radiating from Logan's body beside him, memories trying to flood back in a rush. He couldn't help but steal glances at Logan, taking in every detail of his features and committing them to memory once again. Despite everything, his heart still fluttered at the sight of him. Logan's hands were now tearing into a scone, his fingers working the dough. But one finger, the middle one on his right hand, was bent at an odd angle. It stood out like a broken twig in a field of reeds, jutting outwards, stubborn and oddly captivating. Caleb's gaze was glued to it, thoughts racing back in time. He remembered Logan teaching him how to box when they were just boys playing under the summer sun. The same hands that now clumsily held a buttered scone had once been gloved in soft leather, demonstrating punches in the thin air of their secret hideout in Caleb's backyard. They'd spent hours in that makeshift ring Logan had set up in hidden nearby meadow in the forest, jabbing, dodging, and falling. Falling to the ground, falling on each other. Falling for each other. Sweat had soaked their shirts and dripped down their faces as their hearts pounded together in a rhythm that felt far too intimate for teenage boys. Caleb had returned home after a school year away at boarding school, a year filled with tormenting bullies, cold showers, and lonely nights spent hugging his pillow to his face to hide his tears. Logan had been his solace that grim summer, his courage and his comfort. He'd stood by Caleb's side like an immovable rock and taught him how to stand up for himself. It was during those long afternoons of punching bags and evening chats over their makeshift campfire that Caleb had kissed Logan first. It wasn't planned or thought through. It was simply an eruption of emotions that had been simmering inside of him for far too long. He remembered it clearly, how the sweet taste of that day's afternoon snack, strawberry sorbet, mixed with the sweat that was on Logan's lips as their mouths joined for the first time. How surprised but accepting Logan's eyes looked when Caleb pulled away from him, and how his heart thudded so hard against his chest he thought it would burst out. Now here they sat again on Caleb's family's old Chesterfield couch, the soft creases of worn leather creaking beneath them as they fidgeted. They were no longer boys with dreams of boxing and secret summer kisses. They were men with scars and memories, lugging their separate lives around like invisible weights. Logan's bent finger twitched as he brushed crumbs off his lap. Caleb could only watch in silence and wonder at how a single crooked digit could hold so many stories that shaped him into the man he was today. He also couldn't help but notice the fresh bruises on Logan's knuckles and the way his nose was slightly swollen, telltale signs of a recent fight. Caleb wondered what troubles Logan had gotten himself into over the years, and if he still fought with the same fierce determination he had shown in their makeshift boxing ring. Caleb's gaze drifted to the floor, and he took a deep breath before returning his attention to the conversation. He could hear his grandmother's voice recounting the details of his mother's funeral to Lucy, her words measured and tinged with a mix of sorrow and pride.
"The church was built in the 1800s, you know," his grandmother began, her voice steady despite the weight of her grief. "It's seen generations of our family come and go." She paused to take a sip from her porcelain cup before continuing. "The place was packed, Lucy. People were even standing in the garden, listening to the service through speakers. Catherine touched so many lives. Shop owners, mayors, even the governor himself came to pay his respects." His grandmother turned to look at Caleb, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Your mother was loved by so many, Caleb. They all had stories of her kindness and generosity. It was a beautiful tribute to her life." She glanced towards Caleb's father, her expression solemn. "Tomorrow we gather again for the reading of her will. The family is coming home."
"Coming home indeed," murmured Caleb under his breath, stirring his cup of tea absently. He stared at the swirls dancing in the darkened liquid, the promise of sleepless nights brewing beneath its surface. Caleb pictured the procession of people who would pass by their grand estate tomorrow. They would marvel at its turreted facade garlanded with ivy and wander through its many rooms adorned with polished mahogany and marble. They would politely comment on how beautiful everything was, their pointed gazes and hushed whispers speaking volumes about where they thought his mother's fortune had gone. Caleb knew there would be speculation. Some might even harbor a cruel satisfaction if he were left nothing. After all, Caleb's estrangement had been an open secret.
It was Caleb's father who spoke up after his grandmother was done telling her tale. "Catherine," he began, his voice heavy with grief. She had been looking forward to going to Florence next month.
Lucy shifted next to Caleb, a wash of surprise passing over her face. "But I thought she had just come back from Italy 3 months ago," she asked, her eyebrows knitting together in confusion.
The room's atmosphere shifted, a palpable tension settling over them like a heavy blanket. Caleb's father steeled himself visibly, his gaze lost in the swirls of his own tea, as if seeking answers or solace within its dark depths. He wet his lips, preparing to answer when Caleb's grandmother spoke, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife.
3 months ago, Catherine was at the Mercy Hospital," she quietly explained. "I visited her every day after she had been attacked."
"Attacked?" Caleb's voice echoed in the room, each syllable lingering in the silence that followed, heavy with accusation and disbelief. When was Mom in the hospital?
"Yes," his grandmother confessed, her face pale and drawn. "Catherine didn't want anyone to worry. She insisted on keeping it a secret." Her gaze flitted to the painting on the mantelpiece before refocusing on Caleb's father, whose hands were clenched tightly around his teacup. "She had been mugged one night while she was in the city."
Lucy's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. "Oh my goodness! I had no idea. I must have gotten the dates mixed up then."
Caleb's mind raced, trying to make sense of this new information. His mother, attacked and hospitalized, and no one had thought to tell him? A flicker of anger ignited in his chest, mingling with the grief and confusion that already resided there. He turned his attention to his father, studying the man's reaction. His father's face had turned ashen, his lips pressed into a thin line. Caleb couldn't help but notice the way his hands trembled slightly as he set his teacup down on the saucer, the delicate china clinking together like a whispered secret. Questions swirled in Caleb's mind, each one more troubling than the last. Why had his mother been out in the city alone at night? What had she been doing that put her in harm's way? And why had his father seemed so unsettled by the mention of her attack? Caleb's gaze drifted back to Logan, seeking comfort in the familiarity of his presence. But Logan's eyes were fixed on Caleb's father, a flicker of suspicion dancing behind their blue depths. It was as if he too sensed that something wasn't right.